Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping back in time to uncover the hidden mechanics of one of the absolute greatest superpowers the ancient world ever saw, the Achaemenid Empire. Now, we constantly hear about the majestic palaces of Persepolis, right? Or those epic cinematic clashes with the Greeks. But today, we're looking way past the grand columns and the battlefield myths. We're going into the shadows. We're going to examine the incredible, highly structured administrative and intelligence systems that allowed the Persian kings to hold together a vast, completely diverse world. Okay, let's dive right into this because this is the absolute central problem of ancient statecraft. I want you to imagine trying to rule an empire that at its absolute height contained up to 40% of the entire world's population. You're spanning 3 continents, you're dealing with dozens of different languages, cultures, and religions, and you're doing the whole shebang without the internet, without telephones, without even mechanized transport. So how do you stop a territory this massive from simply tearing itself apart through rebellion and miscommunication? To give you a real sense of the sheer macro scale we're talking about, just consider the modern-day nations this empire encompassed. We are talking about everything from Egypt and Libya in Africa, stretching across Turkey and Greece, straight through the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, all the way to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the borders of India. It was, quite literally, a geographical nightmare. Keeping this colossal puzzle together required way more than just brute force. It required unparalleled organization, and that starts with its logistical veins. Section 1. Arteries of Power, the Royal Road. Now, what's really interesting about this is this staggering number, 2,700. That's the length, in kilometers, of the legendary Royal Road. It was a total masterwork of engineering, largely structured and expanded by Darius the Great. And this wasn't just some dusty dirt path. It was a highly organized highway stretching all the way from the city of Sardis in Western Asia Minor, which is near modern-day Istanbul, straight through the heart of the empire to the capital city of Susa in modern-day Iran. But, a road is only as good as the traffic it can actually support. And that's where this number comes in, 111. This represents the Shupper Kone. These were strategically placed relay stations dotted exactly along the Royal Road. At every single one of these 111 stations, fresh horses and provisions were constantly kept ready to go. This meant the empire's communication network literally never had to sleep. When a rider got tired, he just handed the message to the next rider who leaped onto a fresh horse. It created this ancient pony express that operated 24 hours a day, through rain, snow, or the dead of night. The sheer genius of this infrastructure really hits you when you look at the contrast. For a standard ancient caravan of merchants or travelers to make that journey from Susa to Sardis, it took a grueling 3 months. But the Shopkarne couriers, those imperial messengers, could cover that exact same 2,700-kilometer distance in just 7 days. 7 days! It was the ancient equivalent of high-speed broadband, keeping the central government instantly connected to its furthest borders. And they absolutely needed that speed because fast communication is totally useless if you don't know what information you need to send. Section 2. Shadow of the Throne, Eyes and Ears. All right, now we are entering the mysterious, unseen shadow of the throne. The Achaemenids didn't just have spies. They built a highly structured intelligence hierarchy to preempt rebellion before it even sparked. First up, you had the Eyes of the King. These were official, high-ranking inspectors who traveled with armed guards to openly check on the regional governors, or satraps, basically making sure they were paying their taxes and following the law. Then you had the Little Eyes, who acted essentially as the ancient, terrifying equivalent of modern tax auditors, checking in on day-to-day operations. But the absolute most feared tier was the third one, the Ears of the King. These were completely secret, undercover operatives who reported directly back to the central throne. Let's zoom into the microscale for a second here. Imagine a single spy, one of the ears of the king, just eavesdropping in a crowded, dusty bazaar in some remote province. Nobody knew who they were. They could be a merchant, a beggar, a local official. This created a tremendously heavy psychological presence. The satraps and the citizens always knew that someone somewhere could be listening to them. It was this pervasive surveillance that kept a vast, diverse empire in check, without constantly needing to deploy standing armies. Section 3. The Golden Fist, the Immortals. However, when diplomacy and secret intelligence ultimately failed, the king deployed his enforcers. Say a satrap got a little too ambitious, or a region flat-out refused to pay its tribute. Well, that's when you called in the terrifying military muscle. They were known natively as the Sipa-e Javadan. Now, you likely know them by the name the Greeks gave them, the Immortals. This was the legendary elite standing army of the Achaemenid military. They were heavily armed, highly disciplined, and historically noted for the blinding, almost cinematic gleam of their golden armor and weaponry shining right in the center of the battlefield. They were, without a doubt, the king's personal shock troops. Now, the absolutely crucial point is how they earned that famous name. The core rule of the Sepe Hajavidan was that their numbers never, ever fluctuated. The unit must always be exactly 10,000 men, not 9,999, not 10,001. If a soldier was killed in battle, fell ill, or retired, a reserve elite soldier instantly stepped right into his place. So to their enemies, it appeared as though this massive wall of elite warriors could never be diminished. They appeared literally immortal. Now, we do have to look at the history carefully here. Greek historians, especially Herodotus, heavily mythologize the immortals to make for better storytelling, right? Sometimes exaggerating their supernatural dread or the sheer numbers of the Persian armies just to make Greek victories seem even more miraculous. But whether you strip away the Greek mythology or not, the systemic efficiency and the sheer psychological terror inspired by this constantly replenished force of 10,000 elite soldiers was a very real, very undeniable historical fact. Section 4. The anatomy of imperial control, putting the pieces together. So the crucial point is seeing how these three systems, the road, the spies, and the army, perfectly interlocked to create a machine specifically designed to instantly crush dissent. Let's imagine a hypothetical scenario, basically a mini thriller playing out in the ancient world. Step 1. A rogue governor in a distant province starts planning a rebellion. But the ears of the king overhear this little whisper of treason. Step 2. That spy immediately dispatches a courier on a fresh horse. The message absolutely flies down the dusty royal road, bouncing from Chaperkhane to Chaperkhane, reaching the king in a matter of days instead of months. Step 3. Before that rogue governor can even rally his troops, the blinding gold of the 10,000 immortals arrive at his city gates to enforce the king's will. The rebellion is completely crushed before it truly even begins. Section 5. The legacy of power. Shadows that shaped history. Let's zoom back out to the macro scale for a minute and see how this all builds together, because what the Achaemenids created was a timeless blueprint for modern statecraft. The sheer brilliance of this ancient infrastructure is so much bigger than just one empire. Think about it. The mechanisms of power that we see in massive governments today, state-sponsored intelligence agencies, pervasive surveillance, rapid relay communication, postal networks, and elite standing federal military forces. None of this is strictly modern. These foundational tools for holding vast territories together were pioneered, perfected, and deployed thousands of years ago by the Persian kings. And that leaves us with a genuinely fascinating question to ponder. How much of the modern statecraft we take for granted today was actually born right there on the dusty paths of the royal road and the shadowy corridors of the Achaemenid Empire? It totally reshapes how we view ancient history, doesn't it? Not just as old ruins and myths, but as the hidden, systemic mechanics that literally laid the groundwork for how the world is governed today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the shadows of history.